Why do we need to maintain homeostasis over blood pressure? Why do we need to keep it within a tight, normal range? What does blood pressure do for us?
That's what's like pumping the blood around our...
It's what's propelling the blood through the blood vessels, exactly. Where does that pressure come from?
The heart.
From the heart, specifically the contraction of the ventricles. So it's something we want to maintain tight controls over. And there's multiple mechanisms that are going to be in play. It's so important. There's multiple mechanisms that are going to kick in to try to get that blood pressure back what it needs to be. And most of the scenarios I want to talk about are responding to a drop in blood pressure. Okay. What you have a drop in blood pressure, how do you bring that back up? So first of all, let's just imagine a scenario where we would have a drop in blood pressure. What's a scenario where your systemic blood pressure might suddenly drop?
Sepsis.
Sepsis, okay. Maybe any type of heart attack, especially if the left side has been compromised, your blood pressure can go down. So if that happens, that's something that the body needs to become aware of, and it has specific sensory receptors just for this. They're called chemoreceptors. And, they're not chemoreceptors. They're baroreceptors, which is a type of mechanoreceptor. And what's going to happen, how are they going to be able to detect? So they're located in the aortic arc and also in the carotid arteries going up to the head. And how are these baroreceptors, how are they going to detect a drop in blood pressure?
Because they're inside of the lumen of the artery. Correct?
They're inside the wall of the artery. And what's going to happen that's going to cause them to become stimulated?
The pressure of the blood against the arterial wall.
Yeah, the pressure of the blood goes down, and so it's not going to stretch. And so it detects that lack of stretch as an indication of blood pressure. So it detects that drop in blood pressure. That's taken via sensory neurons to the brain. What part of the brain does that go to?
Medulla?
The medulla oblongata, and maybe elsewhere up in the brainstem. There are these cardioregulatory centers. And what is the medulla oblongata going to do in response to this drop in blood pressure?
Sympathetic. Release epinephrine.
It's going to activate the sympathetic nervous system. And these sympathetic nerve fibers are going to come around, and it's synapsing on the SA node there. What's it telling the SA node to do?
Beat faster.
Fire more quickly, increase heart rate. Then you have these sympathetic fibers that go down here to the ventricle. And what are they causing the ventricle to do? Contract more forcefully, increase contractility. And what are both of these things doing? By increasing heart rate, by increasing contractility, what are we doing? What are we doing to get blood pressure back up?
We're making the pump fire harder.
We're increasing our cardiac output. We're increasing the amount of blood that's going out the heart each minute. And is cardiac output related to blood pressure? It's directly related. Okay. That's if your cardiac output goes up, your blood pressure goes up. If it goes down, it goes down. So it's trying to shoot more blood into the arteries to get that blood pressure back up. And also epinephrine is being released from the adrenal medulla, and that's causing that increased contractility as well. Yeah, so we're increasing cardiac output. We can do that by increasing sympathetic activity, by increasing contractility, and also increasing heart rate. But the key is, one of the mechanisms that the body uses to get blood pressure back up is through the sympathetic nervous system, because that happens almost immediately, right? And another thing that the sympathetic nervous system does, it goes through this vasomotor center in the medulla, but it goes out and it causes most of the blood vessels of the body to vasoconstrict. So if you have a fixed amount of blood in a blood vessel, what can you do to increase the blood pressure?
Vasoconstrict.
Vasoconstrict, decrease the size of that lumen, because then it's putting more pressure on the blood vessel wall. So this is all sympathetic innervation. But there's a couple other mechanisms that we have not talked about yet, we're going to get to when we talk to the urinary system, that are also involved in increasing blood pressure. And one of those is the renin-angiotensin angiotensin-aldosterone system, or ROS. Has anybody heard of this?
I've heard of aldosterone.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's go through this process. There's many organs involved. There's several organs involved, but the goal is to increase blood pressure. That's the goal. So, but this is where we start. But the scenario is we have a drop in blood pressure. And that drop in blood pressure is detected by baroreceptors in the kidney. So blood pressure goes down, those baroreceptors detect it, and in response to that, the kidney releases an enzyme called renin into the blood. And what renin does, there's a molecule called angiotensinogen that's produced by the liver. And it's released into the blood. And then this renin is also in the blood. And what renin does is it converts angiotensinogen into a molecule called angiotensin 1. It cleaves off just 10 amino acids of this larger protein, and it becomes angiotensin 1. That's in the circulation. That circulation eventually goes to the lungs, and it gets exposed to this enzyme called angiotensin converting enzyme, or ACE. And that enzyme converts angiotensin 1 into a molecule called angiotensin 2. And angiotensin 2 is a potent regulator of blood pressure. Okay, this is a, it's a,
And
yeah.
that happens in the after it goes through the lungs.
After it goes
gets
through the
that
lungs.
second. Okay.
Correct. And angiotensin wants to increase blood pressure, and it does it three ways. One, it acts on the hypothalamus, and it stimulates the sensation of thirst. Tries you to get to drink water to increase your blood volume. Two, it causes vasoconstriction of the blood vessels. And the third thing that it does, and this is the aldosterone system part of it, is it acts on the adrenal gland on top of the kidney, specifically, well, you guys know this. It acts on the adrenal cortex. And as if you remember, the adrenal cortex produces steroid hormones. What's another major hormone produced by the adrenal cortex? Cortisol. During stress, during long-term stress. Aldosterone is also released during long-term stress. But it's angiotensin 2 stimulates its release. What does it do? It goes through the blood, it acts back on the kidney, and what it does is it tells the kidney to take sodium that might normally go in the urine and pull it back into the blood. And how does that increase blood pressure? Well, wherever sodium goes, water follows it by osmosis. So you increase water retention, and that elevates blood pressure. Has anybody heard of ACE inhibitors? Drugs called ACE inhibitors? So what would that do? That would, it would inhibit this enzyme here, which would mean what?
You're not getting angiotensin.
You're not getting angiotensin 2. And so what potential benefit would that have for you?
If you have high.
If angiotensin 2 elevates blood pressure, what's going to happen if you decrease the level of angiotensin 2? It's going to lower blood pressure. Another mechanism, so that was an endocrine mechanism, aldosterone. This is another endocrine mechanism. So the sympathetic nervous system got involved, the nervous system got involved. The endocrine system is hitting them with a multi-pronged approach. You know, it has the aldosterone system. It also has this antidiuretic hormone. You guys remember where antidiuretic hormone is made? Where it's stored?
Pituitary gland?
Up here in the pituitary gland. This is the anterior pituitary. This is where all the endocrine axes go through. But then we have the posterior pituitary, which releases oxytocin for labor contractions. And it also releases antidiuretic hormone. What does a diuretic do?
Oh, it
Makes you urinate.
Yeah.
So what is an antidiuretic going to do?
Retains.
Makes you not urinate. Yeah, you're going to pull more water back into the body. So what happens here is, here's the same scenario. You have a decrease in blood pressure, and that's going to cause the release of antidiuretic hormone from the posterior pituitary. Antidiuretic hormone acts on the kidneys, a different part of the kidneys, and it tells the kidneys to take water that normally might go in the urine and pull it back into the body. So we're pulling water back into the body two different ways. One by aldosterone, indirectly through sodium, and also through antidiuretic hormone. And then lastly, those are all situations of how we would elevate blood pressure. But what if we need to decrease blood pressure? Well, the endocrine system has a mechanism for that, and that's called atrial natriuretic peptide. And that's actually a hormone that's produced by the heart. And what happens is if you have an increased stretch of the atria, blood pressure is high, and the atria stretches, that's going to trigger the release of atrial natriuretic peptide. And what is it going to do? It's going to decrease aldosterone release. It's going to act on the adrenal cortex, decrease aldosterone release, decrease antidiuretic hormone release, decrease angiotensin II levels, basically try to undo all those mechanisms that we just talked about. Okay, that's what I wanted to review.